Hey, what's up, guys? It's Rico here, CEO of Sourcefind Asia, host of Made in China podcasts, and the host of the Sourcefind Asia YouTube channel, of course. Back with another one. This is going to be an interesting episode. Sitting here with Micah, and Micah is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a little bit over, I think, like 2 years now, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Just after COVID started.
Yeah. And I mean, we have a lot of common experiences. We met randomly in a bar. And found out that like we have so many mutual friends and connections from China, and we're going to be talking about that and Micah's life experiences. He's lived in many different countries. He works for one of the largest companies in the world, and his job is super interesting. He's kind of like Sherlock Holmes in a sense. All right, cue the intro. Opening question. So when you meet somebody at a social function or work or something like that, work function, how do you answer the question, what do you do?
Well, if it's at a work function, I think most people would kind of get it. Mm-hmm. It's just at a social function with people that aren't really in the same industry. Mm-hmm. I think I give maybe the shortest answer possible. Mm-hmm. I think most of the time, what I do can be a little bit confusing or take a while to explain, and I'm always trying to gauge if somebody's really interested or making small talk. Mm-hmm. Because if they're just making small talk, I realize I'm going to bore them with the details of my job very quickly. So it's like, are they really interested? Do they want to have this conversation, or are they just trying to find some other common interest to discuss or talk about, right? So, but if they are interested, I guess that I just say that it sounds vague. So I think effectively, my career arc or what I'm doing now is called security. But I mean, if you say that to a normal person, I think a million different things can
pop into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, quite honestly, I think that the first time we met, I didn't fully understand what you did. Like, I understood some of it because I'd met like your the guy that works underneath you in China, mm-hmm. And that was also just a weird coincidence. But but I didn't fully understand it until we had like more and more conversations over time, and I was like, oh, like you're in like doing serious investigations and like some of the intricacies around it. And then I was kind of thinking, I think I thought about it like a year ago that I wanted to interview you. I just was a little bit shy to ask until recently.
Well, we're here now, right? So.
Yeah. So, okay, cool. So you just say securities, but what led you, and we'll bring it back to that. So, like, what led you to this stage in life? I mean, you've lived in Russia, obviously from the US, and you've been in the army, like you've had a lot of life experiences. What led you to the stage?
Well, it's been a long, circuitous path.
Start from the beginning.
I've made lots of mistakes that I advise people, do as well. I think what led me here was a vague sense of direction. Some people like have a sense of direction. If you hear like Steven Spielberg say his story, like, oh, I picked up a camera at 4 and knew then that I wanted to be a director, right? All I knew is I wanted to live abroad, right? That's what I knew. So it's like anything under the sun would be fine, but I didn't have, as long as it was in a different country, right? But it wasn't, anything as laser focused as like, I know I want to be in audio visuals and I want to make films or do photography, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
A lot more focused. So I think that, I had my first opportunity to go abroad when I was in the military. So I did like a year in Bosnia as just like, a private or a specialist, on my way to becoming a sergeant when I was active duty U.S. Army. Unfortunately, I got a chance to go to Russia for like a month. And I had some other travels and stuff like that. They sent me to a language school too for Slavic languages, so I got a chance to, be paid to study, right? Which is generally studying is really expensive, and getting skills is expensive. So that it was nice to be paid to do it, right? And have that be the one thing that I thought about. So yeah, I finished that enlistment, and then then I got out. I went to college. I got a degree in Russian literature because I learned Russian when I was in. Found out that was completely useless. So it's the second time, or the first of two times, that I tried to get out of like an industry connected to security or defense, right? So then I did that. There weren't really any opportunities, and right around that time, well, not right around that time, a couple of years prior, the invasion of Iraq had happened. So then I didn't want to do that, but those are the best opportunities that I had. So eventually I did about 3 years in Iraq. I hanging in there. I told you it was a long circuitous story. We're still only about 40% of the way there. Do I keep going, or do you want Bonds to go on a different direction?
No. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
So that takes me... So I was there for a year, right? And then when I was in Russia, so I studied abroad in Russia for part of the time after I was out of the Army going to university. And I met this guy who's been a lifelong friend. And anyway, so we connected again later after my first year in Iraq. So I was like, hey man, what's going on? How you doing? And did you ever get anything in Russia? He's like, no way, man, I'm in China. And the first thing I said was, I'm not learning another language, right? And he's like, no, come hang out. And I was like, well, I'm looking for a break.
Do I know this guy?
No, I don't think you. Yeah, because you guys have never been in the same city.
Okay.
And I can't think of a mutual friend. So, but I was effectively, working abroad, you have the earned income tax credit, and I was burning out. So I was like, well, if I go home in October, then I'm going to lose that. I'm going to have to pay all these taxes on earnings, right? So I wanted to avoid it. And he's like, well, just come to China and I'll just get you a free place to live in for 2 months. Yeah, it's like, bullshit. He's like, yeah, I can. So like a week later, he comes back. He's like, yeah, it's all set up. Come live here. So I was like, okay. So I quit my job and I went there. It was contracting work, right? So you can renew anyways. And I knew that I would renew. So I did a couple of months there, renewed, went back to China for like 6 months on a contract. Figured out that, yeah, I could actually live there. Because my first 2 months there, I wasn't really sure. So, block of time in Iraq, couple of months, block of time in Iraq, teaching contract, last stint in Iraq. Saved a bunch of money knowing that I wanted to get my MBA because learning the lesson from earlier, that what I had chosen to study really wasn't a very marketable skill. And just kind of, again, trying to stay away from the defense industry, right? So then I moved to Beijing, and then I did an MBA program there. And I tried to get work in the field of either...
Was the reason you moved to Beijing because of your buddy, or...
No, because he was in Wuhan.
Yeah.
So the first 2 times, actually all 3 times when I went back, it was to Wuhan. Wuhan was like, after I finished everything, I went to Wuhan thinking that, so I went to study Chinese at a university. And part of the reason I went is because I had made contacts and thought that, I would have this job set up. So I would have this job, I would have certain hours. It was at a private English studio or whatever, or private language school. So it pays a lot better than the university classes.
Same as what I did. Yeah.
So, everybody does that. It's kind of a stepping stone. Not for everyone. If you know you love to teach, there's nothing wrong with it. But other than that, it's a great thing to have in China as a stepping stone while you figure out your way. And it was pretty funny. So I put all of that on there. I got there in September, And great China story for everybody. The owners decided to make off with all the money and all the tuition, and I showed up like October 1st and the doors were closed. So my big plan that I was going to have income while I'm going to university and studying for my GMAT was like totally foiled. Right?
That's so typical.
So at the last second, I had to get a university job. And it was the best one I could find was like an hour drive. So like it added all this time. I had no time to study Chinese.
Somebody needs to do like a documentary about the amount of businesses that start up in China and then all of a sudden close down like randomly. Like, you know, after promising a lot of things to a lot of people, and it's like,
yeah. I think they have a good idea when things are going bad, and they're going to cut their losses, right? So, which is a good lesson, right? I don't know when to cut my losses. I've held on for way too long sometimes. So, so that got me to Beijing. I finished my MBA there, and wanted to get into like marketing or public relations, right? And I tried that for a year, and it didn't work. So what I did was I was like, okay, I will reach out to some folks. And then just because of the previous background, right? So it's like 8 years of, security experience, counterintelligence, various different roles that I did either as a private contractor or as a soldier. And that was pretty quick, right? I got some interest quickly. But yeah, I didn't really want to because there was violence in Iraq and I had bad feelings about what happened. But I was kind of like, okay, I just didn't want to be around anything that heavy effectively. You know what I mean? So it was one of those deals where I was just kind of like, well, if I'm corporate, right, then it'll be financial crimes that I'm dealing with. And I was like, I think I can handle that. So I ended up getting, after all that time looking, within a couple of months, I got 2 offers in the same week from 2 companies that everybody knows. I won't say which ones they are, but it was odd that I couldn't find anything. And then when it rains, it pours, I guess, right, as they say. So, and then,
well, it also probably says that something about what your experience is, like how good you were in the past.
I mean, maybe, I think that
because I'm sure those companies did background research and stuff like that.
And how unusual it is, I think, to have that kind of talent in Asia. And then just the business challenges. So it's actually a very good niche, right? Because I think, you can have all sorts of business interests in a different country. I mean, when it comes to like your last line of defense, right? When it's about loss prevention and asset protection and all that type of stuff, it's like, who can you trust? Can you trust somebody that you've never met before when the hiring person's from over here?
Yeah.
Or are they connected to a network or some people that you inevitably are connected through because of past experiences where they can say, okay, I would rather trust this guy than,
And you've been you've been with that company since when?
2013.
2013.
So we'll hit my 9-year anniversary in like 4 or 5 days.
I guess a question so bringing it back to what we were talking about before, if you're just explaining it like on a basic level, can you give like an example of an investigation or something like that, like from beginning to end?
Yeah, I mean, we do all kinds, right?
Yeah.
So we do simple workplace harassment stuff or workplace behavior stuff, which could be sexual harassment. It could be more like a power harassment. It's like, somebody just belittling someone and telling them they're stupid, or, somebody trying to get something out of the relationship in a sexual gratification sort of way.
Oh, jeez.
Power, right? To make something happen why wouldn't you just go up to a bar and talk to someone?
Exactly. Just a quick side note, like, when the Me Too movement happened, right?
Yeah.
So I'm in China at the time. I started hearing all these stories and Harvey Weinstein and everything like that. And I'm like, God, I didn't even know that it was like bad on this level. And then I started thinking about China itself, because in China there's a weird power dynamic with the bosses and the employees. In my company, it's more like I'm not friends with my employees, but we are friendly, and they can come to me with whatever. And this, I tried to remove all the power dynamic stuff, like we worked in the same room and all that stuff. So I remember most of my employees are female in China. So I remember when the Me Too stuff happened, I started thinking about like my friends. I used to have work parties and stuff. I would invite people, and my friends sometimes would make like inappropriate jokes.
Right.
And then like other people maybe that I don't even know would be, and I didn't really think about it then. And then I was thinking about my employees going to factories by themselves, and they're dealing mostly with men again. And I was like, okay, I need to sit down with my staff and like have a conversation. And I just made like this long speech about like, the Me Too movement. I explained what's going on in the Western world. And I said, if there's anything that has been inappropriate, made you feel uncomfortable, you can tell me now and we'll fix it. They were like, nah. That was it. I was like, nah. There's nothing.
Well, good.
But at least they knew from that moment, like, like if anything happens, like you go to a factory, whatever, like it not even just in the workplace, but you go somewhere else and it's one of our business partners, like, we'll fix that.
So nothing they couldn't handle, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
on their own, which is the best way for it to be. Right?
Yeah.
It's bad if you have to get involved.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I think that other than that, I think, the flavor of Asia a lot of times is conflicts of interest. You know what I mean? So if I get a job in marketing, we need a specific thing. I could go and do like a normal market search. But what I do is I tell my cousin that my company needs this specific thing. And then I say, oh, I found this great company that can do this specific thing for us, right? And then they may have zero capability, or they might just bid ridiculously high for this kind of new thing, right? So, and there's all sorts of theft issues. Can I make a shipment disappear in a system for long enough for it to not be caught? But, what I mean? So all I need is a certain amount of time to make it disappear for. Like, it doesn't have to. I just need to trick you long enough to get away for it, to get away with it, rather than make it disappear permanently. 'Cause, effectively, I will make it disappear permanently if I just have the right amount of time, right? So, and you can look at this stuff, but if you can't find the evidence or you can't find exactly what happened, right? Then they can be successful at it. So I think it's all sorts of stuff like that. It's just I think that especially in China, it was particularly seductive for young people. Because, they had that, I can't remember what that generation was called, right? But, what's the, 1982 or 1985, the people born after that feel like they just don't have a chance.
Yeah.
Because it was like, you meet someone who has a cousin or a brother, right? That, was born in 76, 77, 78. And, they would have a couple of pieces of real estate. And then when Shanghai decided that, and Beijing and the major cities decided that they were going to make everything on parity, with world capitals, these guys' apartments would go from being worth $6,000 to $600,000, right? So they've got these cousins that are driving Ferraris, I mean? Because they cashed out, they just made a bunch of money. And then you got these guys that came after that think they've got no hope, right, to ever get that.
To get to that, yeah.
And then they get a job with a larger company, right? And then they see, okay, these companies are aggressively trying to pursue 1 billion consumers, right? So, they're investing a good amount of money and they see opportunities. And I think that, in a lot of ways, China at the beginning especially was the Wild West, right? So people would, they were so seduced by the idea of massive profits that sometimes they wouldn't realize that the investments that they made to get there, right, were just big tricks.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
There's a good movie about it called China Hustle.
Yeah.
I actually know a few of the people that were involved in some of those those dodgy deeds and stuff like that. It's interesting. So I think were you to ask me about something that would be interesting that's referring to what I'm talking about now later, and I forgot that it's better to say it now. So
yeah. What do you think was sort of your biggest struggle when you first started working in China?
Biggest struggle when I first started working in China?
Yeah.
Okay.
And how did you figure it out?
It's a big company, it's complex, and just learning the business, learning the systems, right? And then I think that, communications. It's international company, so most people are expected to be able to speak English. But, the English tests aren't always verbal, right? Sometimes it's like, here's this test that's a written test, right? There's ways to get past that, of course. So people can show up and really not have great capabilities. So, and I think, if I was going to sit in on a meeting that was like Chinese based, I would have to ask for the PowerPoint in advance, like the night before, and then review all the words and be like, okay, these are the key words that I need to be able to key in on and hear and understand, right? To at least understand the direction of the conversation. Because if there's one word or two or three that they're going to use repeatedly and I'm not familiar, I'm just totally lost in the dark, right? But there are a lot of times I'd have to reschedule stuff because I'd be like, yeah, I asked for that presentation the night before and like they didn't give it, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll just do it anyways, it's no big deal, it seems. Like, no, it's not easy for me. Like, I need to do a little bit of prep or I'm not going to make it here.
I remember it's interesting that you talk about that with meetings, because I remember when I first started going to factories, I'd sit down in meetings and my staff was new. And I'm asking like 3-4 different points in a question or a statement, whatever. And, the answer they would translate it. And then the answer from the factory was like one sentence. And I was like, I mean, I knew enough Chinese at the time to understand that they didn't answer all of the points that I just stated.
Right.
And then the staff would translate it to me, and then I'll be like, but what about everything else? Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you don't really pay attention to some of these things, it's like you can miss out on some key things. Because even my staff were like not pushing to get those answers from the factories.
Yeah, like it's a huge challenge doing what I do, investigations, right? So if you're hitting on something, right, people will naturally be evasive.
Yeah.
Right. So actually being able to understand the words and how they're being used to be able to identify that, even if you don't get actual clues from that individual, right? At least you'll know that something's not right and to keep looking elsewhere or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just as valuable as a confession or something else sometimes. At least something's amiss, right? And you can at least keep looking.
So speaking of confessions, like, have you actually I sat down and interrogated people and made them confess about something? And is it like what we would see in a movie?
Not 24. Everybody has these imaginations based on what they see on TV, propaganda, as they like to call it, or whatever. So
you know what you did.
Yeah, I don't know. It's always interesting how it goes. You never really know what you'll get when you go into like an interview or something. I don't want to call it an interrogation.
Okay.
It's a professional office. You can leave if you want to, but it's one of those things where it's like, if there's a matter to discuss, some people will try to either trick you or, they're actually not involved, or like they'll try and make something clear, you know what I mean? But you'll kind of identify what their position is or what they might be up to with it. So, and occasionally somebody will admit to something.
Most of the time it's just more about collecting the evidence and seeing patterns.
Disappointed when they confess. Don't you give up?
It's like, that was so easy. I'm bored now.
Smart thing is to hide behind your rights for as long as you can, or get on a plane, depending on how serious it is.
I was gonna ask, are there certain, I guess, obviously you spent a long time in China, so you understood the culture, you speak the language, you're a smart guy. So when do you start to put the pieces together in the sense of this is different in China, this is different in the Philippines, this is different in North America, when it comes to how people react to the interviews and things like that?
I guess I don't really know. I guess the flavor of the cases are the same, but human interaction, I guess, in rooms are generally pretty similar. You know what I mean? Like evasive tactics are often similar. Mm-hmm. Eye contact, of course, is slightly different. You know what I mean? I think a lot of Westerners if you don't make eye contact with
can't trust again. Can't trust again.
But those are kind of the easy ones, right? But I think I think in the Philippines, just because the English level is so good that people won't act like they can't speak English. But in China, like definitely, it's like you'll start talking about something in English and go, oh, I don't know English anymore.
Yeah.
I just knew it a minute ago. But it's always funny too. Like if you're like, that's fine, we can do it in Chinese. The eyes just get a little bit wider. And it's like, okay. So
Nice.
but that's why I really need to know my subject matter, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm doing it in Chinese, then it's just a whole nother level of understanding precisely what the person is saying.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean that sounds super complicated because I've done negotiations and stuff like that with factory bosses in Chinese. Mike has done, he's in the markets, like talking, on the street level in Chinese and stuff like that, and it can be complicated. But like doing an interview would be in this kind of way would be very, very difficult, I think.
yeah, I mean, maybe, but it's one of those things where it's like, again, I do a lot of prep when I go in there, and I'm like ready for that type of conversation, and I know that I want to talk about certain things, right? So I'm in there, I've already done my prep to know that I want to talk about this specific topic, right? And then I also have my guardrails where it's like, okay, like if this individual starts speaking about this, it's a red herring, right? If it goes this direction, it's a red herring. So you bring them back to center, and you kind of control them with what the focus is, for lack of a better word than control, right? You direct it, right? Effectively, it's my interview, it's my room, it's my conversation that I'm leading. Right? So, like I can.
So I mean, it's kind of like a podcast interview as well.
Yeah.
Because like that's basically what I do. Is like when I do these interviews, is I have an idea of the story I want to tell. And then if I find that the person veers off somewhere else, I kind of bring them back.
Yeah.
And then I pay attention to what they're saying. If I'm not getting the exact thing that I want, then I'll ask the question in a different way and things like that. All right. So
I think interviews are pretty similar.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do at the end of the day with the conversation. I mean, I guess the conversation is more free flowing. There's an objective to an interview or to a discussion, right? Then you figure out your way to get there. So.
Do you, like, for example, for me, I watch a lot of interviews. I watch a lot of documentaries, interviews, and I'm always like, I see how the sausage is made. Like, I can see when the interviewer is directing something. And also, I like to learn from those interviews. So, do you do the same thing at all? Do you have inspirations? Do you have things that you kind of...
No, I mean, like, I've actually developed the interview course for my company. Right? So it's like, I'm not there all the time, so I'm kind of like an internal, like, depending on the severity of the case, I will be the lead, but a lot of times I'm kind of like a consultant, so I'll help people develop their questioning plans or stuff like that. But actually what I did for the course is take a whole ton of movie scenes and talk about why they're wrong. And then show those clips, and then I go through it and like, this is why this doesn't work. This is why this isn't effective.
Do you have a particular go-to movie that you?
Oh yeah, I mean definitely Usual Suspects, which is old, but I mean like they basically do everything you can possibly do wrong from an interviewing aspect in there. It is like those cops that are in there that are supposed to be these great interviewers. It's idiocy. It's pure idiocy what they do in there. And then what else? I like LA Confidential. I think that's good. Also an older movie, but it's a good one to teach on because they do a very good job playing the subjects off one another. And then so that's kind of interesting. And then what's something recent that was kind of, I don't know. Every once in a while I'll watch and I'll just be like, it's total BS.
This is garbage.
Yeah. But the ones that I taught were the two that I referenced, right? Because those are just easier. But I also went through the Microsoft case, right? The one with Netscape Navigator, and they have it's quite interesting. It's in the Harvard Law archives and stuff like that, so you can actually look at it. But it's an expert witness, but it's an expert witness that's completely deceptive. So he has a conflict of interest that he doesn't disclose. So he's on the side of somebody there in the case. So I don't know if you'll ever look it up. I don't want to name the person. But yeah, it's quite interesting. But yeah, it's textbook evasion with words. It's almost comical if you just like pull out snippets, but it's like, okay, how does somebody, avoid a question? How do they add too many qualifiers? How do, you know what I mean? Like, how do they add, it's just how do they get out of actually
answering the question? Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite fascinating.
Interesting. So you developed the system over there, and then, okay, I guess going back to China, how did you progress in China and then end up in Philippines?
Well, I did the job in China for 5 years, and then at like the 4-year mark, there was an opportunity to move to Asia Pacific. And I think after 9 years in China at that point, altogether 10, right, I was kind of afraid that if I said no and waited it out and let somebody else take the position,
you would have ended up stuck there.
Yeah, it might be another 5 years, and then before you know it, you're the China guy to everybody.
Yeah, okay.
Is China.
That makes sense.
And that's all you can do, right? So, I mean, I felt like 10 years was a good amount to be well experienced there, but not necessarily, typecast. But, after 15 years, I figured people would say that's all you can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's not what I wanted.
So, like moving to Philippines, was it like a unilateral move, or is it like a promotion?
Yeah, so I got promoted before, like the year before I left. So I got promoted in the role, did it from Guangzhou for a year before they moved me over here.
Okay.
So it was kind of a promotion, but like one thing happened after the other. But yeah, so the move happened after the raise, right, or the promotion. So
And I think the next question people would ask would be like, what's the difference between doing what you did in China versus Philippines? Like, what's
I think maybe the scale.
Yeah.
So I think that again, there's 1 billion plus people in China, and here there's only 110 million or whatever it is. So it's almost maybe 1.4 billion times 120 million. I mean, if I were to say that the scale of crimes were 10 to 15x, I think that might be fair. So things here feel a little bit smaller, but things here also feel like classic American organized crime. So like 60s, 70s, you think of like Jersey, New York, it's all these, the sanitation and construction are completely corrupted, right? So those are the things that I'm always looking into. Whereas in China, it was more like digital fraud and like, abuse of coupons and specific products and falsifying promotions and stuff like that. So, so they're slightly different things.
So would you say that it was a little bit more sophisticated in some aspects, like in China?
Well, I mean, it always felt sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
I was doing it not all the time in a different language, but I mean, like in the Philippines, I'm much more using my native language than I was in China, right? So in China, I was looking at more data, but after a while, I think the things that occur to people in China how to do it, just because it's just a very different mentality there, right? So the things that they think about how to do and how to rig and how to change, like if they're criminal minded, right? Or if they're up to something, right? It's just it's different than I would have imagined.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I was flexible enough or open-minded enough to catch some of it. I mean, under no illusions that I caught everything, but I caught more things than I ever thought I would.
I'm just thinking about like you're talking about the generation shift and people feeling desperate, and I'm thinking about Philippines now with 2 years of COVID. A lot of people lost a lot of jobs and stuff like that. Do you see more right now, more fraud and things like that? Because
I mean, that's a good question. I don't really know that that's true, but a lot of what I've done, right, is that it's not just the investigative portions, right? So the investigations prove a problem, right? And then it's like, okay, so then like, well, what would you do to fix it? Because you're the person who found it, right? So after a while, you prove like a few times that you have an outage here of some kind, and then you kind of get leveraged to try to design a fix for the problem, right? To make sure that it wouldn't happen again. So I think that that's how it stays interesting, right? So eventually, sometimes I find the problem when I'm asked to like help design something that's supposed to be, impenetrable or far more difficult to trick or compromise than what they had before, right? So I think that after being here for a few years and doing that, by no means, right, do I think I've become an expert at it, but I think I think that helps, right, because you kind of get rid of some of that collusive layer that's there, right, that just thinks, oh, it's a free-for-all and nobody's looking, and then it's like, oh, okay, somebody's looking, oh, somebody got pinched, oh, I better stop, right, and then it buys you a little time to put something in place, right. So,
what about internally work-wise, like the differences, like culture, Philippines and China?
Yeah, I think differences and culturally.
Of course, we talked about language and stuff like that, but like.
Yeah. Well, there's a. How do I say this and sound nice?
I like that.
So Filipinos are much more socialized.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that just because the culture is far more friendly and like affable, outgoing, and stuff like that. Like in China, you can meet kids whose parents were like, it's competition. Like I said, I mean, like this, 15-to-1 thing that we discussed before related to, the scale of like criminal activity or like the severity of something that somebody might attempt, right? Because it's kind of like, I'll do something that's even more outlandish.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that hurts Chinese kids, you know what I mean, in terms of social development, when their parents are like, oh my God, how am I going to get these kids to be the cream of the crop of 1.4 billion instead of the cream of the crop of 100 million, you know what I mean? So like, how do I do that? Right? So, and the answer is you lock them in their room with their school books for 19 years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, it's like I remember one time I was talking to one of my students, and I just asked her, I was like, "What do you do for fun, like during the week, not just weekends?" And she was like, "What do you?" She was like confused, like fun on the week.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, what's your daily life like?" She was like, "Well, I wake up at 6. I read a little bit in my textbooks. I have breakfast while I'm reading. Then I go to school. I'm at school from 7:30 till 3 p.m. Then I come here. I study English." And then she would finish studying around like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. Go home, do my homework from school, go to bed. And I was just, in between that, there was also piano lessons. And I was just like, I was like, this is not a childhood.